So the stuff that I've been working on for the past few days has shown some results. Now we're looking at a composition here which is familiar from the previous demos. Now when I go into this composition, we're able to set initial values for everything that's on the screen, which is say line thickness, color, opacity, and so forth, and the degree to which it's drawn on. So these aren't the initial conditions that I'm referring to, but we're going to take a look at that, and we'll do that by restarting the project. And now you're going to see that when the, just give it a second, and you're going to see that when the composition loads, which is going to happen right now, that represents the initial conditions that I set for this composition. And those initial conditions say that the artwork that we saw at the beginning that is inside the panels won't appear. I want this to be how people encounter my Novillo composition. So when I start swiping, you'll see that the lines start to change on the panels. And then you'll also see that the artwork appears at a certain point. It actually appears at a point that's timed to the end of one change in the panels, frame or in point 15 basically. So when we hit in point 15, those artwork lines appear. So this idea of having initial conditions is saying you're not going to see the artwork when you first start up. We now have that working, but the panels, of course, we do want on. Now, if you were watching carefully, you'll have noticed, or you might have noticed, that the line work on the art showed up as a kind of a drawn, a very quick drawn, but a drawn. And that's because the initial setting for that line work was that it would have zero length, or it wouldn't be drawn on at all. Now when that changed, it changed to full draw, so it drew it on, as opposed to fading on or changing color or whatever. So previous to this, every object on the screen when first displayed would have this arbitrary, when the composition first loaded, would have this arbitrary line weight, arbitrary color, which was the same, orange, just to kind of allow me to see what was there. And then when we started to swipe, they would take on their initial values that were encoded in the actual events. One of the key parts of Novillo is that the artist will now be able to play with the revealing and the hiding of the lines of their drawing, as well as the shapes and everything else, in the order and in the way that they want to add to the drama of that particular panel or that particular composition or their progression in the story. This is not an animation system. That's really not the point. But what is the point is that it's a system that allows this kind of staged presentation. So now we're well on the way to getting control of that from beginning to end throughout the composition. Part of the challenge of this is to figure out how to integrate functional changes like this into the existing interface. 3 days to get the basics of it working. But basically, that's not an excuse for making the interface horribly complex. So my goal is always to update the interface, keeping as much of the initial simplicity design in place as possible. So what you see here can be compared to the interface that was there before for the panel, and we'll just compare those now. And you can see that not much has changed. Primarily, I've just rearranged or reorganized the buttons on the right-hand side. But I've also added one button, and that's the initial settings button, which we're going to get into now. So the approach I took in reorganizing these buttons and adding this orange button, I think is kind of a good arrangement, fairly easy for people to understand. And I'll just highlight that button right now. There we go. And I'm now in the initial conditions mode. Now nothing has changed, it's exactly the same as it was, but I'm now free to choose one of the categories in there on those green buttons and set the initial conditions that I want. I've chosen a specific thread, as I always do, but this doesn't apply to any event on the thread. It applies just to the initial conditions for that thread. So this one is applying to the artwork. And I'm changing using the orange bars on the left and right of the editing area. These represent the degree to which the line is drawn at the beginning and the end of the range it's concerned with. So I've made the initial bar on the left 0, and I've made the bar on the right 100%, and that should give us, well, let's take a look at the result. And when we start, boom. Now you can see there's a change where they are partly drawn on. Now set the initial conditions for the draw on of the line work, or the artwork. I can go ahead and once again I can reselect the same thread, and when I do that, there we go. Notice it doesn't matter which event I choose. Go back into initial events, into initial conditions, and once again I'll change it. This time I'll set this to 0, and I'll set this one 100%. And now let's again restart the composition, restart the Novillo, and the result comes up as soon as the composition renders, and it looks like this. So this is obviously giving me the control we're looking for, and it applies to anything on the screen. If I go back once again to the initial conditions, you can see that this doesn't just apply to the drawn, but it also can be applied to the line weight. So here I'm going to change the line weight. There we go. I'm going to change it to a value, and now what we'll do is restart. And this is getting tedious, I know, but once again, as we reload, now we'll see that the line work is now in this new lighter weight that I'd set in there. So I'm setting the initial conditions for both in the draw on and in the line weight, but it could just as easily be color, and it could also be true for the panels as well, which actually do have an initial value set on them as well, but we're not demoing that. So at this point, the challenge is to transition from the initial conditions to the first event that is encountered while swiping for draw on. For all the other features, line color, line weight, it's already working properly. But for the draw on, it's a little tougher. So that's the update. In terms of key feature set that we need to allow Novillo to be used to demonstrate its key functionality, I think we're really close, and it'll be easier to tell people how this works as a storytelling tool. Once the draw-on feature is complete, there's a ton of refinement needed still to be done inside the app itself, but it feels to me like a major hump is being crossed right around now, and this is moving into an app capable of doing what it is I imagined when I started this whole project. Okay, thanks a lot for watching. Dan Donaldson. I'm not going to make a big fuss about my Novillo status. I accept the fact that as the pinnacle of the Novillo ecosystem, worldview, Weltanschauung, I have an importance that derives from this thing in itself, and that you are probably the audience as a model. Because this is like, a terrible thing. Okay, well, that's the end. Bye.